Some find the Don Sweeney contract extension to be enraging. Others find it at least uninspiring. Today, we're looking at the good, bad, and ugly of his tenure to see whether or not it was at least justifiable.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Wednesday, May 21st. Thank you so much for making Locked On Boston Bruins your first listen every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today we are continuing the discussion on a 2-year contract extension for general manager Don Sweeney that will keep him in the mix until the end of the 2027-28 season, on paper at least. Breaking down the good, the bad, and the ugly from his tenure that began 10 years ago to see whether it is justifiable. And to me, perhaps not inspiring. I don't see it as enraging as a lot of the fan base seems to view it as on social media. But I think it's justifiable based on the whole body of work that he has presented. There's been no cups, but a lot of other successes along the way. Some misses, some really ugly bits that we'll all break down here coming up. Before we get into all that, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. You can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. I am a lifelong Boston Bruins fan, and I've been covering this team for various outlets and the NHL as a whole for about 20 years now. So Don Sweeney has been extended as general manager of the Boston Bruins. It was announced on Tuesday. You can go back and listen to that episode if you missed it. It's been a decade of highs, lows, missed opportunities, and it is fair to ask whether he's still the right man for the job. Now, recency bias would suggest, hey, maybe they need a fresh face because they have just missed the playoffs for the first time since 2017. It's the third time they've missed the playoffs since he took over in 2015, and it comes just 2 years after they were the top regular season team in NHL history, which I think, yeah, that's a steep drop, but you can't ignore the fact that they were just at that peak in the regular season anyways, and there are some dividends to pay as a result of building that team. Now, since taking over in 2015, no NHL team has earned more regular season points than the Boston Bruins under Don Sweeney. That includes 2 President's Trophies and an NHL record 65-win, 135-point season in 2022-23. You can't ignore that he put together that team. There were some core pieces that he inherited, of course. Your Patrice Bergerons, Brad Marchand, David Krejci, who came back for that season after taking a year off to go play back home in Czechia. But he was able to put a core around that team that was able to achieve that high. Now, of course, they lost in the first round, which we'll discuss later in the good and or ugly parts of the podcast. But the Bruins have made the playoffs in 7 of 10 seasons under Sweeney, including 7 straight appearances from 2018 to 2024, highlighted by a trip to the Stanley Cup final in 2019. That's pretty good. Elite regular season success. No cups. They went to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final in 2019. They lost in Game 7 to the Florida Panthers in 2023. Those were, as good of a shot as you're going to get. If they had won in Game 7, and everydayers will know I've said this many times, you play that game 100 times, Bruins on home ice against the St. Louis Blues. They win more often than not. And I mean, it wasn't Don Sweeney's fault that Brad Marchand took a bad line change at the end of near the end of the first period and led to a goal from the St. Louis Blues. It wasn't Don Sweeney's fault that Jordan Binnington just happened to have the game of his life that night. He got the team there and they weren't able to perform. And even more so in 2023. Don Sweeney went all in and then some with the trades with the Washington Capitals, the Detroit Red Wings, just adding so much to that team in order to help them succeed. They had a 3-1 series lead and could not close things out. Is that his fault? I don't think so necessarily. You could argue that replacing Bruce Cassidy with Jim Montgomery set them back in terms of coaching experience for that moment. But at the same time, maybe they don't have the same team under Bruce Cassidy if Jake DeBrusk stands with his trade request, David Krejci doesn't come back, etc. Anyways, elite regular season success, no cups. We'll talk about that later on. A lot, of course, has been made of Don Sweeney's draft record, but there have been some draft wins, to be sure. Charlie McAvoy, 2016, franchise defenseman, potential captain, team leader. Jeremy Swayman was drafted in the 4th round. Drafted, developed a true number 1 goalie. Of course, he had a down season this past year. Part of that was the protracted or extended contract stalemate, but his overall body of work so far suggests he is a number 1 goalie at the NHL level, especially last year in the playoffs. Got Matt Poitras in the 2nd round, made the team at 19, shows high-end two-way upside. Mason Lohrei in 2020 in the 2nd round, promising top 4 defenseman. Brandon Carlo, 2015, 2nd round, durable, shutdown defenseman with long-term value that they were able to flip for a 1st-round pick in 2026, and Fraser Minton, who was a 2nd-round pick. One of Don Sweeney's strengths is his smart trades. He was able to acquire Charlie Coyle in 2019, who was a core member for 6 years before being traded to Colorado for Casey Middlestat, who's much younger, higher offensive upside, and a top prospect in Will Zellers. But Coyle brought steady middle 6 center abilities, key playoff contributions, and leadership as well. Hampus Lindholm in 2022, top pairing defenseman, acquired, extended long-term. That was a great trade. Taylor Hall was stolen from Buffalo for a 2nd-round pick, and Anders Bjork in 2021. Yeah, Sweeney was aided there by Hall being set on coming to Boston. But still, he was able to pull that off. Sabres could have balked and said no. Marcus Johansson, 2019, was a solid deadline depth add who helped fuel a Stanley Cup final run. He also had some good value contracts over the span as well, signing Brad Marchand, David Pastrnak, some of the league's best value deals during their peaks, locked up core pieces like Charlie McAvoy, Brandon Carlo, Hampus Lindholm at key moments. So that's the good here with respect to Don Sweeney. Fantastic regular season success, despite some misgivings about his draft record. There were some hits. McAvoy, Swayman, like core pieces for this team. Poitras, Lohrei, very promising. Brandon Carlo was a solid contributor for a long time. Jury's still out on Fabian Lysell. He's got a hit on the 7th overall pick here coming up. Some smart trades, some value contracts, and 2 President's Trophies, GM of the Year award, NHL record 65 win, 135 point season in 2022-23. Those are the good parts. Is there some bad? Yes. Is there some ugly? Certainly. And we will touch on both of those here as the podcast continues. Are you looking for a protein snack that is both nutritious and delicious? Crack into that wonderful source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you, unsaturated fats to help you keep feeling fuller longer. I love the no shells variety. So does my 12-year-old son. It's the perfect grab and go snack when you're playing Fortnite and need to keep your kids fueled. Whether I'm snacking at my desk on a road trip, just need a quick protein boost, they're my go-to. But some people love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch. They're available as well. Get snacking, get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. All you have to do is visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Thank you so much again for joining me here on Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today we're discussing Don Sweeney's general manager tenure, his extension yesterday, whether it was warranted, looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly. What falls under bad? Well, the Bruins still have one of the shallowest prospect pools in the NHL, and drafting depth and development has certainly been an issue. Picks like Jakub Zboril, Urho Vaakanainen, John Beecher have provided little return. Vaakanainen was later dealt in the Lindholm trade to Anaheim, which got some value there. And context does matter here, right? Boston has frequently traded away first and second round picks in a win now approach. Since 2018, they've had just 2 first rounders, limiting their prospect pipeline growth. So it's kind of a catch-22, right? You don't have high-end prospects because they haven't been drafting that high in the NHL draft. They've been trading picks in 2018. They traded their first. 2019, John Beecher, 21 points in 130 NHL games. They traded their first in 2020. They traded, they drafted Fabian Lysell. Jury's still out. Traded firsts, seconds in 2022, 2023. They drafted Dean Letourneau last year after trading with the Ottawa Senators. The reality is, people crap on Don Sweeney's draft record, but he was routinely trading picks in a win now mentality, which is kind of what you want at the moment, right? You want the Bruins to go all in. You want the team to have the best possible chance of winning in that moment without regard necessarily for the future. And that's just the cost of doing business. Cost of trying to win is trading futures for present help, whether it's rentals or guys who will stick around for a little bit. And you can't knock his draft record in a shallow prospect pool without acknowledging the fact that they've routinely had late first round picks and or no picks until the second or third round. Second round picks that they've selected recently, such as Mason Lohrei, Matt Poitras, look to be decent. Lack of high-end first-round picks. That's why this year is so important, because that 7th overall pick, Don Sweeney went the reverse at this year's trade deadline and recouped some picks, recouped some prospects for some core players, and that's why it's super important to hit on this 7th overall pick this year so that he can start to salvage his reputation as at least a decent drafter. What else was bad apart from the drafting? We have some pretty significant free agent misses. Sweeney came in hot in 2015, signing Matt Beleskey, a $19 million flop after one successful playoff run. David Backes, he did good work early on by trading Milan Lucic to, the Kings, got a first-round pick, but then immediately went out and signed David Backes to a 5-year, $30 million deal for a declining veteran who was eventually traded to Anaheim in a pretty costly cap dump move. Overpaid on veterans like Nick Foligno, Craig Smith, Thomas Nosek, Eric Howla, you can argue, for limited return. I forgot to mention in the good under the trades, Pavel Zacha for Eric Howla, very smart trade. A lot of the moves he made at the trade deadline were very savvy moves. But Beleskey, Backes, for sure, were misses. And the moment he had cap space to burn, you got Nick Foligno, Thomas Nosek. This past summer, Nikita Zadorov, Elias Lindholm. I think you can fit those guys right now under bad. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people are suggesting this was not the time for an extension or he should be fired, because the first moment you get an opportunity to kind of retool things, you're giving money to Nikita Zadorov, Elias Lindholm, aging veterans, and they're reminiscent of these contracts, your Beleskys, your Backuses, Folignos, etc. We did see them kind of turn things around later on in the season, and I do believe that trading some core guys like Charlie Coyle, Brad Marchand, Brandon Carlo, even Trent Frederick, that opens up for Lindholm and Zadorov to take more ownership, being Boston Bruins, being leaders. And you saw Lindholm especially raise his game later on in the season. You're seeing him excel at the World Championships. So the first year of those deals, obviously a big miss, but I think we need to at least give it a couple more years to really assess whether or not they were huge misses. And again, remember, this is only a 2-year contract extension, and the basis for it perhaps is because they were having trouble bringing in a new coach. If a coach is coming in knowing that a GM only has 1 year left on his current deal, then he may be thinking, well, maybe this isn't a secure work environment, because if he can be dumped in a year, then maybe whoever's brought in will want to bring in their own coach. So that's why that 2-year extension was given right now, in part. And that was verified by Elliot Friedman on today's 32 Thoughts podcast. There's been some cap mismanagement. Taylor Hall had to be traded in 2023 for for nothing really, due to bonus overages from Krejci and Bergeron's 1-year deals. Again, a function of going all in 2023. Mike Riley was dumped in similar fashion. Danton Heinen, James Van Riemsdyk did turn into value signings to help Boston win a playoff round in 2024, but they also were allowed to walk for nothing, as were Torrey Krug in 2020, Tyler Bertuzzi, Dmitry Orlov in 2023, and Jake DeBrusk, a productive homegrown winger who was allowed to walk without any return last summer. You also had young guys like Ryan Lindgren sent to the Rangers in a Rick Nash trade, turned into a top 4 blue liner. Ryan Donato dealt for Charlie Coyle. It was a solid move for Boston, but they still gave up a promising young scorer who is going to be highly coveted in free agency this summer. Same with Frank Vatrano, who was traded to Florida for a 3rd rounder, has since become a reliable 20-goal scorer for the Ducks. Coaching turnover is a bad look as well. Fired Bruce Cassidy in 2022. He then went on to win a Stanley Cup with Vegas after being hired 5 minutes after being fired. Jim Montgomery was brought in, led the team to that historic 2023 season. Jack Adams Trophy winner, fired in late 2024 after early playoff exits. specifically in 2023, second round last year, but could not match up with the Florida Panthers. The Bruins are now seeking their third head coach in 4 years, which GMs very rarely get an opportunity to do. And that's why the pressure is still on for him to hit with the best available coach. Missed out on some big names, but there's still some very attractive head coach talent out there, up and coming guys. If the Bruins aren't going to bring a fresh vision in managerial wise, they have to do that with respect to the head coach. That's some of the bad. And I'm sure I'm missing stuff. Please hit me up on the YouTube comments or on social at Locked NHL Bruins on X, Blue Sky, Instagram. Is there other bad stuff I've missed? Is there some good stuff I've missed? What's the ugly? And there has been some ugly. We'll touch on that here as the podcast continues. All right, the ugly of uglies in Don Sweeney's tenure hit right after he was hired, and that was the 2015 draft disaster. They had 3 picks in the first round, all back-to-back, which just made it even crazier. And we all remember that famous tweet the Bruins could have Matt Barzal, Kyle Connor, Oliver Shillington here. They left Thomas Chabot on the board as well. They came out with Jakobs Borrell, Jake DeBrusk, and Zach Senyshyn, a franchise-altering misfire that still looms over the organization. Now, DeBrusk was a decent pick, let's be honest. Borrell was properly rated at that time. He was rated above Chabot. They were defense partners in junior. Senyshyn, just a wild off-the-board pick that absolutely nobody saw coming, nobody endorsed, and just I feel really bad for him because he didn't pick himself that early, and he's kind of a bit of a joke at this point, just uttering his name, but that wasn't his choice, and I'm sure he would have preferred to have been a late pick and been allowed to develop as such and go to Europe if need be without any repercussions. Anyways, they left Matthew Barzal on the table. They left Kyle Connor on the table. Connor specifically is exactly what this team needs right now. And a lot of people argue, well, they would have won multiple cups if they had hit at that draft. You can't just 2-2 doesn't necessarily equal 4 in that situation. Who knows if they're able to select Charlie McAvoy the next year, if their franchise is altered in a way that it changes where they finish the next year. Who knows if they're able to keep all of these guys in terms of, I mean, these guys are making big money right now. Barzal 9, Connor almost 8, but his next deal is going to be like in the David Pastrnak range. Chabot's making 8.5. There's all kinds of implications there, but that was certainly an ugly thing that has hung over Don Sweeney and Cam Neely ever since. They've tried to defend it. They've tried to explain it, but at the end of the day, you had 3 first-round picks. You got one guy that was useful out of that bunch, and then you allowed him to walk for nothing last summer. So that was, pretty inexcusable. The Mitchell Miller signing in 2022 was a huge black mark on this franchise, and quite honestly, that could have been grounds for dismissal right there. They signed a player with a documented history of bullying and racism. The backlash was immediate and severe. The contract was rescinded, but the damage was done. And that was right at the beginning of that historic season. Kind of forgotten. It's kind of an afterthought, but to try to squeeze that in amidst that historic season and when the vibes were super high, not smart at all, especially when they tried to pull it off as the team was about to play on Hockey Night in Canada in Toronto that Saturday night. The Mitchell Miller signing, completely inexcusable. There was an investigation, but to my knowledge, there was really no repercussions for having done that. And I just can't believe no people came out of that unscathed, that there was no real repercussions from that. Certainly, like, you can look at the draft and say, yeah, that was a mistake, but this truly was an ugly situation. The firing of Bruce Cassidy, you could argue, was ugly, seen by many as scapegoating after consistent regular season success, strong analytics. His cup win with Vegas the very next season really added sting to that decision, and the way it went down as well. They kind of said he was safe, and then you had Don Sweeney going to his house to deliver the news. It really felt like the Bruins had chosen to back like a Jake DeBrusk and a Trent Frederick, possibly even a David Krejci, guys who seemingly had issues with Bruce Cassidy, and it paid off that next regular season. But you can very much argue, as I've said many times, that Bruce Cassidy's coaching experience could have helped in the first round against Florida in 2023. Maybe he goes to Jeremy Swayman sooner than Jim Montgomery did. Maybe he doesn't juggle around the lines like Jim Montgomery did. Yes, there were some injuries. Krejci, Bergeron were banged up, but when Bergeron comes back, obviously you put Marchand back with him. It's just a fait accompli. You could also put the way that Zdeno Chara went out as under ugly, certainly bad. He wanted to remain as a member of the Boston Bruins to end his career, and he was essentially said, we're not going to re-sign you because we're going with some younger options. And then he ended up bouncing around between the Washington Capitals and the New York Islanders. Brad Marchand trading the captain, your cultural heartbeat, marks a seismic shift for this team. Possibly necessary, again, as you have a new core coming in, new leadership, fresh blood. Maybe it was time to cut ties with that old guard and stop hanging on to past success and try to carve your own path. But it seemed a bit rushed, not great value. They will get a 2027 first round pick because Marchand has officially played in half of Florida's playoff games, but he's leading their team in scoring in the playoffs right now and just looks full on Marchand beast mode right now. The kind of player that we have come to know and love. Would it have been better to keep him at the deadline and try to come to a contract resolution with him to help with this retool? Yes. Do you want to pay Brad Marchand $6-7 million at 36, 37, 38? Not necessarily. Wish him the best, move on, and get what you can for him. But a lot of people, justifiably, still not too happy about that one. And speaking of justifiable, I think if you look at the whole body of work, an extension is justifiable. You look at, they flamed out in 2023, but Sweeney was able to pull off a successful transition last season where they beat Toronto in the first round, made it to the second round. This season certainly was a down year. But if you look at what he was able to do at the trade deadline, that's a very good start towards a retool and gaining back those assets. You can't say we don't have a prospect pool, the drafting's been so bad, without acknowledging some of the hits at draft day and also applauding him for recouping some picks, prospects that could potentially hit. The draft past like the top 5-10 picks is quite a crapshoot. And you look at any team around the NHL, like Florida has traded first round picks consistently the last several years. They too will have some downtimes coming up. Pittsburgh, Chicago, San Jose, Nashville. These are teams that have had recent success that have dipped as well. Boston's not immune to that. And Don Sweeney's whole body of work suggests that he should have the opportunity to finish off what he has started here, taking the Bruins almost to a Stanley Cup in 2019. Best regular season in NHL history 2 years ago. Yep, down year this year. Nobody's happy about it, including myself. I would have liked more success with Sweeney and Neely at the helm. I'm not enraged by this extension by any means. No Stanley Cup, shallow prospect pool, constant coaching turnover is a problem. The move, let's say, isn't necessarily inspiring. The pressure to win has never been higher, though. And Don Sweeney has to hit with the coach, has to hit with the 7th overall pick, has to hit in free agency. And if they're in the same position next year, if they're in the same position 2 years from now, then yeah, toss it all out, restart. And that's a point in time where you'd be considering maybe trading David Pastrnak or Charlie McAvoy or Jeremy Swayman, because maybe you're in full-on rebuild territory. So if this team is serious about winning, remaining competitive, Don Sweeney has to do his best work here this summer. Failing that, hot seat will remain, and his legacy will be defined as squandering the last years of Bergeron, Marchand, Krejci, even Chara, Rask, Krug, and not being able to successfully transition to the next era of winning Boston Bruins hockey. And it'll be up to somebody else to try to bring that back up. All right, that's my take on everything, the good, the bad, the ugly. Let me know what you think. Hit me up on YouTube, Instagram, X, Blue Sky, whatever. Check out the Locked On NHL Game Night podcast next, and every game, every night until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. You can get all of that on the Locked On NHL feed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. Please do take care of yourselves, take care of each other. We'll talk to you again here on the next episode of Locked On Boston Bruins.